So yesterday a report dropped that Disney and Sony had a big falling out over negotiations and Spider-Man will no longer be in the MCU. In typical internet fashion, people split into different sides and started debating who was to blame. A bunch of people saying that Sony is being greedy, shrewd, stupid, moronic. But are they really? Let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Sean and I love to talk about movies way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comments section. Let's have it out down there. Who do you blame for this mess? Is it Disney? Is it Sony? Is it just the reality of two big corporations trying to work together to tell stories? Eventually you're gonna have a falling out. Tell me what you thought down below in the comment section. One thing real quick before we get started. Today there is a sale in my merch store, so shirts like this one right here, my I Talk Movies Too Much shirts, they're all 35% off the next few days in my merch store. That link is down below in the description. With that said, let's start talking about this massive story. So in the original deal, Disney would get 5% of the profits from the Sony Spider-Man films. In the renegotiations, Disney proposed switching that to a 50-50 split on both expenses and profits. So both sides pony up 50% for the cost of the production, and both of them give 50% of the profits afterwards. At face value, if it was a clean slate, that looks like a pretty fair deal. Both sides on this have been benefiting from this. The quality seems to be there. People seem to be enjoying the films. And of course, they are raking in the dough. So naturally, they should split expenses. They should split the profits. But Sony outright shuts that deal down. Now, I think there should be renegotiations. I do think that 5% for Disney seems really low for what they bring to the table and how much Sony is getting out of this deal. So I'm 100% for, let's figure out a new number. At the same time, I think a 50-50 split and Disney proposing a 50-50 split is an absolutely outrageous deal, and to me just comes off like a bully tactic. They know that they're Disney, they know they have the MCU, they know that they're just a steamroller, and so they are going to Sony and just putting something out there that if they said it to anyone else, it would just be offensive. It would be, excuse me, if anyone else made this deal to Sony, it would be laughable. It would be outrageous that they would propose the idea of a 50-50 split on a property that Sony has the rights to. But because they're Disney, because they're so popular, because they're so powerful, they can get away with making an outrageous proposal and the internet will still back them, which is kind of what you're seeing. I don't blame Sony at all for turning down a 50-50 split deal. I also don't think Sony was being shrewd in the 5% deal that they cut with Disney, though I do think it should be renegotiated because of the success of the last few years. But it's not like Sony was like exploiting Disney in that deal and just being shrewd towards them. So you got to think back the history of all of this. In the mid-90s, Marvel, the company, was in serious financial trouble. They weren't purchased by Disney until 15 years after that. And they were in serious financial trouble and verge of bankruptcy, all this stuff. So they just started selling off the film rights to try and get some income to try and cover all of their financial troubles. Sony steps in, simplifying a complex situation. Essentially, Sony steps in, buys the rights. They give money to Marvel for the rights to Spider-Man. Sony takes a risk on Spider-Man that for 15 years, Marvel had been trying to get a Spider-Man movie made. I actually made a video about that you can check out right up there. And they couldn't get it done. And so Sony takes a risk and buys something that up to this point in time had not produced any money and actually cost Marvel a bunch of money and other studios as well. They buy that. They spend money to get those rights. And one of the reasons that we have comic book movies today is because Sony made the Raimi Spider-Man films, and those were massive hits. Some people don't think they've aged well. Some people think that the first two are masterpieces. There's a lot of different opinions on them. There's no question that they were incredibly important for laying the foundation for the modern era of comic book movies, and that's to Sony's credit. They took a risk on something in the mid-90s with a company that was going bankrupt. They bought it, they made the movies, they laid the foundation that largely the MCU was later built on. They were the predecessors that cut the path. You have to give Sony credit on some of this stuff. Now jump forward to 2015-ish. The MCU is in full gear. They're doing awesome. They're coming off of the Avengers and they've had other hit movies. Creatively, they're doing great. And they want Spider-Man. They don't need Spider-Man. They want Spider-Man because they were doing fine without Spider-Man. They wanted Spider-Man. Sony was having some financial troubles. They were having creative troubles. Obviously, Amazing Spider-Man series didn't take off the way they wanted it to, wasn't received the way they wanted it to be received. And so Sony is actually the one in kind of the weaker position. Disney is in a very powerful position as they have this massively successful franchise, and they look at what Sony has, Spider-Man, and they want it. Marvel sold the rights to Sony years before. They know how valuable it is now. They wanted it because they knew if they had Spider-Man in their franchise, it would be beneficial for them. They would get something out of it. It would improve the quality of their product. So they, as a company in a position of power, thought, if we just get 5% of the movies that Sony makes, but we get access to their character, that is worth it to us. We will benefit if we get Spider-Man. He is a valuable character. He will improve the quality of our product. And we all agree on that. That's why you're watching this video. That's why you're passionate about this, because we agree the MCU is better with Spider-Man in it. And so they weren't wrong about that. The MCU benefited by getting access to the character. Spider-Man himself, not just the 5%. Spider-Man himself is valuable to Disney and Marvel Studios in the MCU. And they also get 5% of the profits of these other movies because on the flip side to it, Sony gets access to a hit franchise. Sony gets access to the Kevin Feige machine and Kevin Feige's time. So Kevin Feige's time, this franchise are valuable themselves to Sony. And we'd all agree on that. That we look at it and we say, yeah, Far From Home made a lot more money because it was following up Endgame. They're tied to a franchise that we love, therefore we're much more likely to go see it, even though we don't trust Sony all that much. So this is mutually beneficial, but it's very important to note on all of this. At the point in time where Disney said, yes, we will take this deal where we get Spider-Man and only 5%, they were in a position of power. They were successful. They did not need Spider-Man. They took the deal because they wanted Spider-Man. If anything, Sony needed Disney more, and they still took the deal. Very important that leads up to today's discussion. That brings us to our current news, or the year 2019. Disney is in a position where they just had the back-to-back mega hits of Infinity War and Endgame, and one of the reasons that those movies were successful was that Spider-Man was in them. There's a lot of reasons they were successful. There's a lot of great things about them, and a key piece is Spider-Man. He is central inside of it. Their movies were better, and they benefited from using a Sony character. So mutually beneficial. Likewise, on the flip side, Spider-Man Far From Home is the most successful Spider-Man film of all time. Why is that? It's following up Endgame. It's building on it's reaping the benefits of the wave of momentum created by these Disney Marvel Studio films. Mutually beneficial. So in this context where everybody is benefiting from the deal, and us as an audience, we're getting a great product and part of this very cool universe, coming out of this, Disney goes to Sony and says, we want a 50-50 split now. We'll pay for 50% of expenses and we want 50% of the profits. Disney showed up and proposed a wildly different deal. They agreed to something years before that everybody benefited from, and now they're saying, we want to do something totally different. Remember, Sony owns the rights. Disney said, we want to use your characters, so let's make a deal because we want to use that guy. We want to borrow your thing. They're not entitled to Spider-Man. They don't have the rights to Spider-Man. Sony has the rights to Spider-Man. Disney is not entitled to Spider-Man. They want to use Spider-Man, and they went to the person that owns it, and they said, we think that we should have just as much profit in this as you. Like, they went to the person that owns it and said, I think the fair deal is we're each 50-50 on this one. Which, it's insulting. It's an insulting thing to say because it in a sense, it devalues owning the rights to the Spider-Man character entirely. Like, that's a potent thing to say to someone. So I just think it's an outrageous thing that Disney did. Now, on the flip side to it, some of the buzz is people saying, well, from Disney's perspective, with all the properties they do have, it's not worth Kevin Feige's time. It's not worth Marvel Studios' time to take up one of their slots for just 5%. And you're right. Like, I would agree. Like, yeah, for 5%, Kevin Feige shouldn't be using up their spots when they can make so much more money on these other things. If they can make 100% on Black Panther 2, why would you take 5% of Spider-Man? Right. I agree with you. But that's a Disney problem. That's not Sony's fault. Sony still owns the rights. That's not to blame Sony that Kevin Feige only has so much time and there's only so many slots out there. That is simply not Sony's fault. That is not for them to blame. That's an internal problem that Disney and Kevin Feige have to figure out. Which, once again, back to the central premise of this video, that Sony is not to blame here. So the frustration thing for me is it felt like a win-win-win. Disney got to use Spider-Man and their movies were better for it and they got 5%. Sony got to be a part of a big franchise and their movies more successful because of it. And us as an audience, we got better products. Win-win-win. And Disney proposed the change. Disney proactively monkeyed around with things. And it's not just that they proposed a renegotiation. I am 100% for a renegotiation. I think that Disney should get more than 5%. I think the benefits to everybody and the relationship here, Disney's value is worth more than 5%. But it's not like going from 5% to a slap in the face 50-50. It shuts down discussions when you propose something that outrageous. Like, well, if that's what you're proposing, we're not on the same page. Like, we're not even in the same game. We're like, you're proposing something insulting to me as Sony. I don't know why I phrased it like that. So of course Sony shut it down. And of course there should be renegotiations inside of this. So one of the things that people are saying that, Sony's being greedy or Disney's being greedy. At the end of the day, yeah, of course they are. Disney and Sony are corporations. They are they're companies with shareholders. They have to make billions of dollars. They are in this for the money. The way they make money is by making movies. They try to make movies, tell stories that people like, that create characters and products out there that people want to purchase. There's all these ways but it's about making money. They tell great stories to make money. They want to tell a great story because they have to make money. So when people are like, well, Sony's just greedy, they don't care about telling stories. Not really. They are greedy. They want to make money, but it's not like they're out there to like sabotage telling stories or like because they don't want to work with Marvel, they're the bad guys inside of this. You have to think about it from the perspective that Disney just did a bully tactic. They know they're powerful. They know that they've got the MCU. And so they're like, yeah, well, you better go 50-50 with us or we're not going to work with you anymore. That's a bully tactic. That's not the tactic of someone that's like noble in wanting to tell great stories for the sake of telling stories. No, they're trying to make money themselves. Both sides are trying to make money. And that's why the stuff I've been reading on Twitter, the conversation, I had this video was sparked by about 2 hours of tweeting back and forth with people like, but Disney wants to have been telling great stories and Sony's just about the money. No, it's true. Disney's telling great stories. They've got a great creative team. But it's not because Sony doesn't want to tell great stories. They just don't have the talent. They don't have the systems in place. That's why it's mutually beneficial for everybody. That's why they have the valuable character. They have the better creative team. It's good for everybody. Let's just negotiate something reasonable. 5%, probably not reasonable. 50-50 split when one of them owns the rights, not really reasonable. Let's find the reasonable middle ground. And that's what I want you guys to do too. In your discussions that you're having, don't let your fanboyisms, your love for the MCU to blind you to the fact that it's not like Sony's the bad guy just because they don't want to give up 50-50 split on something they own. Like they're not being evil in doing that. They're not the bad guys. You wouldn't do that either. That's someone doing a bully tactic on you. Be reasonable. Look at it from a perspective of they're both corporations trying to make money. Think about it that way, and I think it makes a lot more sense. There's not like the good guy and the bad guy. This was always going to be a messy situation. Two massive corporations teaming up with with valuable franchises and stuff. This was always going to be messy. They were always going to be butting heads trying to get more money. That was from the beginning. Everybody knew this thing was going to be funky as can be and go crazy at some point in time. And we've reached that point because they've all made so much money, so they all want to make more money. They're all greedy. keep that in mind. Tell me your thoughts down below. Am I crazy? Am I onto something? Be reasonable about it. Don't just be a fanboy. Tell me what you think. You can check out my video on the 8 canceled Spider-Man movies right over there and see that this drama for Spider-Man, it's not a new thing. It's been around for a long time. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.